All right, part four is a little more intense today, so we're going to talk about Newton's laws of motion. This will be a really basic overview before we get the opportunity to really dive into each um, law of motion. So we'll be discussing three separate laws of motion here. The first law of motion, which is also known as the law of inertia, is an object in motion stays in motion, or an object at rest stays at rest until an unbalanced net force acts upon it. So, for instance, if you have a ball, it's going to just sit on the floor or on the countertop until something comes along and um, moves it. So, there's a force, say a hand, that hits the ball and creates um, motion in that ball. So, it will continue to roll and roll and roll and roll until it has um, forces that act against it. So, gravity, friction, a wall which stops, it hits this force. It will continue that motion until those forces all act against it. Um, so, with inertia, this is something that is going to take some practice to really understand, but you have a tendency for an object to resist any change in its motion, and that will keep object moving or keep an object still. The second law of motion is a net force acting on an object causes the object to accelerate in the direction of the force. So we have this great big equation on our screen right now, and you'll need to know, which is force equals mass times acceleration. So acceleration is determined by the size of the force and the mass of the object. So for instance, if you have a ping pong ball and a bowling ball, you have two different masses here, and it's going to take two different forces to move those objects. So the third and final law of motion is for every action or force, there is an equal and opposite reaction or force. And this is where momentum comes into play. So the property of moving an object resulting from its mass and velocity is the very definition of momentum. So in order to find a momentum for an equation, you'll have to multiply your mass and your velocity. So the picture that's there is of a rocket ship, and that just helps you to remember that the object, the mass of the object, needs to have a force greater to keep it moving. And by that I mean that there's a velocity that comes into play, reactions and actions in the opposite direction. And we'll get a chance to experiment with all that so it becomes a little easier to understand. All right, so for a summary, and this is something you can jot down or you can replay several times just to help you understand. The first law you can think of as why is something moving. So this is your force causes a change for acceleration of an object. The second law would be why does something speed up? So why does a heavy object need more force, and how weight changes due to gravitational pull. And then what makes the force would be the third one. So what causes force in one object and the opposite in another object to create this movement and motion. So with all that information in your notebook, you'll be able to tackle the things that we'll be talking about in class. This is, of course, by Sir Isaac Newton. These laws are named from. If you have any questions, you can always ask in class or email, get some text messages going on between everybody or Edmodo so we can figure out how to better explain this. It can be a little tricky. In keeping the laws separated, the first, second, and third, understanding the difference between the three. But we'll definitely get there.